Hi guys, welcome aboard the show. All right, welcome aboard the Sunday, March 1st, 2015 Mac Forum video chat. Hope that you are prepared for what's coming up this weekend. Hope that you found some of the tips in last week's show interesting. It was kind of interesting picking up some of the things that some of the tips there. You never can tell what you find when you start searching for some of this stuff. Last week we fortunately came up with some pretty good ones, so I hope you found them helpful. A lot of good iTunes info in the last in the last show. We're going to try to carry forward with some other things in this week's episode. So just checking the feed there to make sure that we had everything up and going. We had a minor little technical difficulty there for a minute or two, but we finally got that. We finally got that up and going. We were a couple of minutes late, but we're ready to go now, and hope that you find something interesting in this one. I see that Dave Smith posted a question asking if the broadcast was going to go forward, and I'm just going to answer that real quick so that we have got that little technical difficulty out of the way. Tonight, we have a couple more tips for you. A couple of iOS tips, a couple of excuse me, drew a blank there for a second. A couple of more tips related to iTunes use. I hope you find these kind of helpful. We're going to get started with that right now and roll on through the usual site roundup. First of all, as of about a half hour or so before the show, we had a total of 284,801 threads, 1,564,329 posts, and those posts were composed of 293,063 members. The newest of which is Vero99, VERO99. So I want to welcome the newest member and any members that joined in the preceding week. So so I welcome you to the show, and I hope that you find these things interesting this week. Let's go ahead and dive right into some of the tips. As I might have mentioned to you, to some of you before, I've only recently been able to run iOS 8 on my phone. I had iOS 8 on my previous iPad, but I hadn't run the iPad in quite a while because I had cracked the screen. So I haven't really done a lot with iOS 8. But one of the things that I had experimented with a little bit was Siri. And was just starting to get used to what Siri could and could not do very well when I cracked the screen on the iPad and had to put that aside. Well, recently I've gotten to the point where my gear is able to run Siri again, and I found an interesting use for Siri that I had not really paid attention to when I was experimenting with it before. This tip comes from the Macworld UK site, and as usual, I'll have a link to this and all the tips in the show notes. It should go up after the show. And speaking of show notes, one of the things you'll notice in the forum this week, if you've been to the forum this week, and if you haven't, I suggest you take a look. We've moved all of the show-related information into a sticky thread. I had a little time this past week. We had some inclement weather, and I was off work, so I took a few minutes and moved all of the show announcements are in that sticky on Mac Forum Sunday video chat. You'll see it in the news and community announcement forum. And the most recent show announcement will be at the bottom of the thread. So if you just go to the last page and scroll down, you'll see each week's link to that week's show. And after the show, you'll see a summary of the tips discussed and links to the articles that describe those tips in a little more detail. That's something that we probably should have done long ago, but I did manage to get it done over the past week. So let's dive right in, and we'll add this week's tips to it. You can use Siri to find out what song you're listening to. I have been using an application called SoundHound to do this, but I noticed in this Macworld tip from Macworld UK that you can do the same thing with Siri, and that is, let's say that you're out and about, you got the radio on in your car, or maybe you're walking through the mall or wherever, and you hear a song that you just really like, you got to have it, but you don't know the artist or the song information, that kind of thing. Siri can help you. What you do is you say to Siri, what song is this? And the digital assistant will search its databanks and return with the results. And when you click on the iTunes Store link, and the track will be purchased and added to your library. You can also, I have another tip here. That one came from Macworld UK. The computerworld.com site happened to mention the following, and I thought this was a good follow-on hint to the first one. The songs that you ask Siri to identify for you are listed inside iTunes on your iOS device, so you can buy it later. To read the list, launch iTunes, tap the 3-line graphic in the top right under the power meter, and select Siri in the menu from the next screen. And there you'll see every song that Siri has identified for you. I believe Siri's song finding capabilities are based on a program called Shazam, which I have on my Mac. And I let Shazam, I did not have, I have SoundHound on my iPhone, and I've let Shazam go through my iTunes library last week, because I had a number of tracks that were just identified as track 1, track 2, track 3, and they were different albums, different artists, so it's hard to, some of them were hard to pin down. I knew what I thought they were, and when you played them, you go, okay, wait, that's not the song I thought it was, what's going on? Using Shazam on the Mac, and occasionally resorting to SoundHound on the phone, I was able to identify most of the tracks that were problematic. So those two tips will help you if you're out and about with your iPad or your iPhone and run into a song that you aren't able to identify right away. Last week, I mentioned to you some tips for getting around the song limit, the number of songs in iTunes Match. Well, this tip is not really a follow-on to that. What it is something else that you can do to enhance the way you use iTunes Match. You may find this helpful, you may not, depending upon how you operate things. You can create a playlist, a smart playlist, to find all the music in your library that can be upgraded with iTunes Match. You go to launch iTunes and go to File, New, and Smart Playlist, and then have the Smart Playlist match all of the following rules. These are the rules you need to create that playlist. Bitrate less than 256 kbps. Music, media kind is music. iCloud status is matched. And click OK, and the resulting playlist will display all the music in your library that can be upgraded with iTunes Match. And then you can repeat the process to kind of weed out those that have been purchased. If you change the last line in these to iCloud status is purchased, and that will show you the ones that are already in the in your iCloud list. That tip also comes from Macworld UK. So I will have that one and all of the tips for this week in the show notes following the show. We'll try to get those up probably later this evening within a few minutes of the show. What I generally do is take my rundown notes, and edit them briefly, and then put these in one place, and maybe edit them a little bit, clean up the note taking a little bit, and get it into a readable form, and then post it up both in the thread and on the Google Plus page where we meet every week. So no matter which place you go, you'll find a link to the appropriate show notes. We have not put up notes from a couple of the shows before I started keeping the show notes. There are a few of the early shows that do not really have notes. We didn't do a rundown for those. Some of the ones that Van and I did, for example, didn't really have a specific rundown. I'll try to go back later when I have a little more time, play through those, pick out any tips, and put those tips in there as well. We can also use the show sticky thread if you have suggestions for improving the show or anything like that that you think would be helpful to us to improve the show. We certainly would like to continue improving. Keeping along with the music theme for this week's tips, here's one about using multiple AirPlay devices to play music all over your home. If you have multiple AirPlay devices, say, for example, Apple TV, AirPlay speakers, you can play music through all of those devices at once by clicking AirPlay and changing it from single to multiple, and check all the devices that you want to use. I've done that on a small scale when my MacBook Pro is in the home office and the Apple TV is in the living room. If I want to hear things out of both sets of speakers, I've done this before. It works pretty well. Doesn't seem to be an issue with lag and things getting out of sync. I don't know how well it would work with a larger number of devices involved. Don't have a way of testing that. I think you would be okay, but I am not sure about that at the moment. But that's another tip that you can use to kind of enhance your iTunes experience. That one, of course, comes from Macworld UK, one of their 15 iTunes tips. Some of the iTunes tips in that list were also in the list I gave you last week. There was some overlap there. Some of these tips have appeared in multiple places at different times, depending on which iTunes version you're working with, and so you may see them in more than one place. The references that I give you in the show notes are just where I happen to find them. Or in some cases, I've seen it in two different places, and one of the two happened to have a better example or better description. So that gives you another thing to do. with your iTunes library, and that will help you. That will help you to be able to use it in ways that you want to use. iTunes, I find, is by the same token both one of the nicer music programs I've used, and at times, under certain circumstances, the most frustrating. So you'll see a few more tips on iTunes as we go along whenever I find something interesting. Here's one for you, though, that has to do with the reminder application. I know that many of you have family members who, you have kids or whatever, where you need to share a schedule or reminders across multiple people, perhaps with colleagues or other family members. The Reminders app in iOS 8 has the ability to create a shared reminder list. And you do that by creating a new list, tapping on the title of the list that you just create. Tap on the title of the list you are currently in, select New List. Name the list and assign it a color. When you add items to the list, tap Edit and choose Sharing. Now you can type the names of those with whom you wish to share the list. Anyone in the group can complete items, share new items, and generally participate in getting things done. So, for example, let us say that you have a list of things that you need to do for that day. And one of the items in the list might be, let's just say, pick up the kids at soccer practice. And it has the time, say soccer practice ends at 5 o'clock. And now someone in that group of people, either your kids or your spouse, knows that soccer practice today isn't going to end until 5:30. They could edit it, and therefore updating the reminders, and the person who's going to do the pickup would know that the time has been changed. That seems to me like a very interesting and useful way to get some things done. I just read this tip earlier today. Experimented with it a little bit, still need to do some work where it's not that it doesn't work. For me, I have to use it a couple of times before I get fluent with it. But I can see some situations where it might come in handy if I'm trying to notify multiple people about a meeting or a change in, change in plans or something of that nature. Lots of potential uses there for that. And then one of the other tips that I found earlier today, as I was poking around the internet trying to figure out what would I include as potentially useful information today. One of the things that I discovered, or stumbled on, if you will, is the fact that you can get Siri to read your incoming notifications for you as they come in, telling you who's calling, reading new texts, let you know if some important email is received or something like that. You can, to access this, you go to Settings, General, Accessibility, and VoiceOver. Okay? Don't toggle VoiceOver to on, just simply say, set the toggle, always speak notifications to on. You're going to need to be sure to remember to turn it off when in public or when you're in situations where you don't want to be disturbed by these notifications. That's one of the things I think that I like. And last but not least, I have a link to quite a few System 7 tips. For those of you that are still using iOS 7 and you think I've forgotten all about you, I have a link to some iOS 7 tips in this week's show notes. I'll have those up. Most of you probably know these because iOS 7 has been out for a while. But there are always people who, say, have just acquired an iDevice. They maybe acquired an older one and are only able to run 7, or they're comfortable with 7, don't want to upgrade to 8 yet, don't need some of 8's new features, iOS 8's new features, so they decide to wait a little bit. And so I'll include in the show notes a series of System 7 notes in one of the article links. I think you'll find some of those very useful. The problem with tip sites, I find, is that a tip that catches my attention because it fits with the way I work and the way I use my phone and my iDevices might not be very useful for you, and a tip that works very well for you may not be very helpful for me. It's a real toss-up in terms of what's going to be useful and what isn't. Same thing with looking at tips for OS 10. Some tips are for things that I read before or I've known for quite some time. Other tips are things that, for example, I look at and they either make no sense to me or they don't fit the way that I work on the computer, so I kind of forget about them until somebody asks me, how do I do whatever? And that's going to do. You know, my wife does that to me all the time. I think she's made it her mission to prove to me that I am not the smartest person in the world, despite the fact that numerous people on the forum have declared me a genius. Her response is that she's been married to me for a long time, therefore she knows better than they do. And occasionally she has asked me something that I don't know the answer to because I don't use my phone in that way. And then I have to go off and search the internet and then find a solution. And it generally involves much scratching of the head and wondering how in the world did anybody think of doing that. The nice thing is there's usually a way to do it. One of the things that I like about the trend that computers have taken as they've evolved is for most operating system and most pieces of software, there has been more than one way to do something. In fact, I had that someone suggest that to me on a forum once. We were talking about troubleshooting, and one of the people who had started the thread happened to mention that every time they did I think it was a cut and paste in this particular program, the program would crash and burn. And one of my fellow forum members suggested to the poster, if you tried using cut and paste from the menu commands and it's crashing and burning, try doing the same operation from the keyboard shortcut. In his experience, using the keyboard shortcuts, and in his experience, sometimes the command would not work if you use the menu command, but that same command would work if you use the keyboard shortcuts. Now, I'm not a smart enough programmer to figure out why that would be that way, but it's certainly worth a try, and it's a good indication that there are usually more than one way to solve a problem. Something else that you need to keep in mind, particularly if you are new to an operating system. Let's say, you know, we get a lot of folks who come over from Windows and they're trying to figure out a way to do some task. And you have to do that task a little differently on the Mac, and it takes some adjusting to. Some of them are almost identical, but some tasks are a little different. And one of the things that I kind of try to encourage people to do is poke around in the software and look at the options that are available. And I'll tell you, why I say that. I've been using computers for a long time. I am more fluent with the Mac than I am with Windows, but I've been using even PCs since the late 1980s, well, early 1990s, before I was using them consistently. And at one time, I was using WordPerfect for the PC at one of the schools that I was working at the time. And consistently, I would have, when I would turn something in, the formatting would be just all screwed up. Now, I know now what the problem was. But at the time, I went in one day and someone mentioned to me, said, just give me give me this information on disk and I'll fix it, because the last couple of ones I've gotten have been, just the formatting's been wrecked. And she mentioned the page setup commands and print preview commands. And I said, yeah, I know about those. I use them in Microsoft Word all the time. And I had never found them in WordPerfect, because I just hadn't really poked around in WordPerfect. WordPerfect did not work the way my brain did. And I hadn't really poked around because I was afraid to mess something up. And she said, oh, that's easy. Those commands are easily found. And she showed me where they were. I had a Homer Simpson moment. It had never dawned on me that they might be in a different menu. I expected them to be in the file menu. That's where Word had put them. That's where virtually every other word processor that I'd used up to that point had them. I kind of figured that's where the WordPerfect guys had put them. Boy, was I wrong. And talk about an embarrassing type moment, because that was the kind of thing that I kind of expected myself to know, is where that command is. So one of the things you need to keep in mind as you're troubleshooting or trying to do new tasks, look around a little bit, poke around in the menus, various menus, and see if you can find something that might be relevant. Now, I do recommend that if you're going to be poking around in there, looking at different commands and what they do it on a backup of your data. Don't do this the night before you got a major third quarter report due, and you're poking around Excel or poking around numbers, trying to figure out a new way to do stuff. That's not the time to do it. That's too much stress. You'll never remember the whatever procedure you come up with. Pick a time when you're not quite as stressed out, and you might remember the new trick. We find new people all the time contributing a post or contributing information to a thread. So just because you're new to Mac Forum doesn't mean that you won't have some information that could be helpful to our members. We've had a number of instances in the last few weeks where new members have made important contributions to a thread because they knew something that I did, or not only I, but other members of the thread did not know. And that's going to just about do it for the tips this week. I kind of hope that you find some of them helpful. I enjoy doing these. Sometimes it's a challenge coming up with tips that we haven't done before. If you'll notice, sometimes these tips kind of follow a pattern. The last 2 weeks, I've spent some time with iTunes. Last week, it was primarily because I found several potentially useful tips. This week, it just so happened that the tips that I found seemed to follow along with last week's tips. So look for more information in the coming weeks. We'll try to include a selection of OS 10 tips, iOS tips, both 8 and earlier. Sometimes we'll have something interesting from an earlier version. And also from any of the iOS devices, Apple TV, you name it. We'll probably include some stuff in the way of Apple rumors and news that have popped up. Uh, I didn't do that in the last couple of episodes because I really haven't hit very many of the rumor sites. I know that there's rumor of the new iPad and iPad Plus. I don't really hang out on the rumor sites very much because, to be honest with you, Apple keeps these kinds of things close to the vest. If you read rumor sites often enough, you'll find that many times they take one little tidbit of information and blow it into something that is highly bizarre, or in some cases, years away from coming to fruition. For example, the before the iPhone came out, there were rumors for quite some time on a number of sites, some of them reputable, some of them not, that Apple was going to get into the smartphone market. But the rumors were all over the place. Apple was going to write software for a smartphone. Apple was going to build a smartphone. Apple was going to put a man on the moon. You can find an Apple rumor about almost, and very seldom does information get out of one infinite loop in Cupertino unless Apple wants it to come out. So take what you read on various rumor sites, what you read and hear, with a grain of salt. Those things frequently are just, they may be informed speculation, but they're still speculation nonetheless. And, well, here's a great example. The current Apple TV, as it is currently um, uh, constructed, the original rumors about the Apple TV did not have to do with a media playback device. It had to do with Apple working on what is now referred to as smart TV. That was several years ago. And that rumor is still floating around. So I'm not saying Apple isn't working on a smart TV, but what I'm saying is those rumors have been around for a long time, and a number of Apple in that amount of time has released several new devices and updated those devices, and the rumor of a Apple branded smart TV still keeps coming and coming and coming and won't go away. Well, if you're going to believe the rumor, try to find out how much credibility does this person have? How often have they been right in the past? That's something that I think should come into play far more often than it does. It seems like the way to draw traffic to your site these days is to post a rumor that says Apple's going to do something. And that'll start a collection of posters who want an interesting discussion, and forum trolls. Take your pick. Sometimes you get the forum trolls, sometimes you get a good, interesting discussion. If you'd like a topic for this week, and I may post this in the show notes as well, just to stimulate a little discussion, not because I know anything different or out of the ordinary. Ask yourself this question: what would you like to see in the next incarnation of iTunes? And I'm somewhat serious here. I like iTunes, but it has some issues that could be handled better. I have said on numerous occasions, both in forums and a couple of times in the shows here, that I would like to see something equivalent, roughly equivalent to a server edition of iTunes that could run on, say, a device like the Apple TV, so that you don't have to have your computer on and have the home sharing turned on. If there are nights when, it's 2 o'clock in the morning you're not listening to iTunes. You want to play a movie that's in your iTunes library, so you got to have the computer on. Whereas if you had some type of iTunes server type situation, you could either have the library stored on that device or on a hard drive that that device can see. The server would handle all of the mechanics of showing you what's there, uh, triggering the playback, and that kind of thing. In other words, the server would be doing what your computer is doing now. Uh, I know some of you will say, well, yeah, there's third-party devices, NAS devices, that have had that have some iTunes interoperability in them. That is true. I have had, let me see, at least two of them, maybe a third. I honestly don't remember. I was not pleased with either of them. Both of them died far sooner than they should have. I'm not going to mention the name brands here. That's not relevant. I don't think either one of the devices is being made anymore. And in one case, I don't even remember the name of the darn thing. But, you know, even when it was working, the process of adding files and getting them ready to play was just never as intuitive as leaving my Mac on and letting the Apple TV see the stuff from there. So I think Apple could help in many ways by building a sort of a server edition of iTunes that behaved. iTunes could still be the front end. Just let some other device handle that, so you don't have to absolutely have to have um, your Mac turned on to make iTunes work and behave like a media server. To me, the logical device for that, for taking that role to some extent, the logical device for that is the Apple TV. It's going to be powered on anyway. The content could be stored on a drive, either directly attached to the Apple TV or attached via network. And all the Apple TV has to handle essentially is the current software, which is the content from other things like ESPN, Hulu, and the like, and also then have a small program there that handles the capability, the iTunes capability, so that you could search your content, pull up a particular movie or song, and play it back without having your computer running 24/7. Especially if you tend to use your computer to do processor-intensive tasks at night. You know, if you're one of these folks who, you know, you're running a couple of video encodes or something like that, and you would like to do a movie, but you kind of don't want to slow down the encode, something like a server-enabled version iTunes-aware device becomes a good idea. And it looks like that's going to just about do it for this week. I've enjoyed being with you this week. I see by the clock it's taken roughly 45 minutes for this show. You probably don't want to hear me bloviate any further on any of these topics. I'll have the show notes up. I'll try to get them up later this evening. If not, they will be up sometime tomorrow evening. And I hope that you enjoy the tips and find them useful. Keep an eye on the show, Sunday show sticky thread. Look there for any show-related announcements, such as if the show is going to be coming up or if the time has changed, cancellation, anything of that nature is going to be there. Right now, the tips are included in the announcement with whatever show is there. What I generally do is put the tips, put the announcement to the show up first, usually because I'm still working on the specific tips in question. And then sometime after the show, usually within the first half hour or so, I'll put up the show notes. So look for those in the Mac Forum Sunday chat sticky. And also, like I say, right now, the tips are included as part of that thread. I'm debating whether or not to pull the thread, the tips into a separate thread, but for the foreseeable future, they'll kind of be incorporated in the other show-related announcements. That's also going to be the place to go if you have a suggestion for improving the show, a tip that you'd like to see covered on the show. I'd like to open that up also to if you have a question that's confusing you, but that's probably better asked in the regular forum because you know the chats only come around once a week. By the time we get around to answering it during the chat, you've probably read the answer somewhere in the forum. So that's going to do it for this week. I enjoyed bringing this episode of the Sunday Chat to you. I hope that you find the tips and all the information included useful. Until next time, this is your host, Sly Dude. You've been watching the Mac Forum Sunday video chat for March 1st, 2015. I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for joining us.